truth in our lives, we each may choose the best of what has gone before, the best of that which lives today, to fashion us a keep. And from the minds of those who enter in, this gift is given us, ours still to give and yet to keep. A gift of value great with life itself. And this, our heritage.
In this series of heritage programs, we are privileged to meet Dr. Paul J. Tillich, author, lecturer, theologian, philosopher, and member of the faculty, Harvard Divinity School, Harvard University. In this fourth program, Dr. Tillich and his guests discuss philosophy and art. Dr. Tillich is joined by Dr. Robert C. Johnson, professor of systematic theology, Pittsburg Theological Seminary, and Mr. Walter E. Wiest, associate professor of philosophy of religion and Christian ethics, Pittsburg Theological Seminary.
Dr. Tillich, you are one of the few writers in the American culture writing from the point of view of religion or theology who have dealt seriously with the problem of doubt and attempted to deal with it in some kind of positive or constructive way. There are many parents who have a genuine problem here because they've been led to believe that the phenomenon of doubt in their children is a bad thing. The church sometimes has dealt with it as a bad thing. I wonder if you could give us some guidance on how to deal with doubt in young people and children.
Now, first of all, I am very glad that you refer to children, because there the problem, I think, is most acute and direct. My own experience has led me to the following, let's call it a scheme of 3 steps with respect to the religious education of children. The first is that you give them some of the most impressive and powerful symbols of the religious tradition. I speak now of all religions and denominations. Because if you don't do this, then the earliest impressions of children are prone to be something which is not the ultimate. But in the symbols, although the children understand them only in a very limited way, something ultimate is implied. When we speak of Christ or the Holy Virgin or God and his actions or the creation or the fall or all these great religious symbols which appear in Christianity, then the children don't understand them, but they have some kind of receptivity for them which has influence on their whole life. Then a second period comes, and this is the critical period when out of the surroundings or out of their own thinking, the doubt about the validity of these symbols arises. This is a necessary period. Without it, no human being ever would become a fully developed, mature personality. There must be in the development of children a moment in which the question of truth is asked. And then the moment comes in which parents or teachers or ministers must deal with children in a quite different way. Then they must try to interpret these symbols, to give their meaning, to show that they are not fairy tales, but that they are not events either which you can describe as you can describe a battle of the past or a person of the past, but that they are expressions of man's relationship to what is infinitely serious. And this is the period where often the parents and equally often the teachers simply fail. They are not able to do this with that wisdom which is necessary. I have heard of Sunday school teachers who, if a child raises his or her finger and asks such a question, he or she is scolded and asked to keep silent. Now I would say in this moment, if by chance I came into this class, I would dismiss this teacher the same day, the same hour. She wouldn't even have the possibility to continue this 1 hour, so angry I would become. She has then to explain and has not to dictate and to say you must believe that. I think this is one of the greatest evils in the great churches of today, that they don't take the question of the children seriously. I take them so seriously that even when I come to my most difficult philosophical problems, I often quote children's questions, because the children know more about the immediate problems than the spoiled philosophers in many cases. And then, if this is done successfully, then we come to the third step, in which we can again speak and live in the great classical symbols, but we can live in them now knowing that they are symbols, that the problem is not whether this or this has happened, whether God exists or does not exist, but the problem is what does all this mean for the meaning of my life. Now this is a schematic process of religious education, but this gives me also the key for the meaning of faith in mature people, because in mature people the same stages always reappear. There's always moments in which one is inclined to accept everything in a kind of superstitious subjection to authorities. Then there are moments in which one is inclined to doubt of everything. And these moments are then when maturity speaks to us as an ideal. And then the third stage in which faith is there. We are grasped by it, but it is not belief in something or something not, but it is a surrender of the whole personality to the meaning of life, which is expressed in the symbols we have now understood in these three stages.
You speak of this second stage, the critical stage. I think perhaps that you would say that when young people are dealt with wrongly in this second stage, this produces a kind of guilt in human life which is unhealthy. Now, one of the forms in which we encounter this at the present time in the American culture is in terms of the consciousness of status and all that goes along with this, and the great pressure for conformity in young people. Do you see a certain parallel here where young people begin to doubt the value of this status consciousness and try to break out of it? Should this perhaps be dealt with in the same way as religious doubt?
Yes, no, I wouldn't even question this. It seems to me absolutely clear. And I think even these two things often belong together. There are cultural situations where the conformity is at the same time a religious conformity. And therefore, religious doubt and doubt about the whole state of conformist society is one and the same doubt. And I, of course, would say that we have to deal with it in the same way. I would generally say a boy who never was a rebel against the conformity of parents, teachers, and the surrounding society never can become something important. He must have, in a special period, his doubt. And now some people say, all right, I will agree with you, in some period the child or the young man must have the period of rebellion, but after a certain time this should stop. and then he should become a good, lovable conformist. And I would say no. The greatest rebels were rebels their whole life. The Christians, the early Christians, the prophets, the reformers, the early Franciscans, and I can say many others who were great rebels when they were mature, because then the institutions in which they lived were understood by them in all their negativities, and they rebelled against them. So I would say criticism and doubt belong to the total development of a sound life, and I may add, I call this my Protestant principle.
I wouldn't want to ask you to play the role of a prophet, but you think that it's possible, if the sociological analysis which is being given to us at the present is accurate, and the pressures toward conformity are as great as we are being told, do you think that it's possible that we may be creating some kind of national neurosis, or perhaps neurosis in the whole of Western culture with this?
I think your question is already an understatement. We have done this already, and I believe that the innumerable individual cases of neurotic behavior are expressions of this universal neurosis. And may I add here something? It is a very logical question you asked when you asked about the relation of conformity and neurosis. Because what is neurosis? Neurosis is the escape from facing reality as a whole. People are too weak to face reality as it really is. And so they withdraw. And they withdraw, as I like to say, to some place of safety, to some castle. This is a very good withdrawal, very useful for them for the moment. The whole of life doesn't bother them anymore, and they have their safety in a limited relationship to life. And now the neurotic action follows. They defend this limited place on which they are able to live against the whole of reality. We call that defense mechanism in psychoanalysis, or we call it compulsory self-restriction, or compulsory dependence on one element in oneself. Now, this then leads, if it is done by larger groups of the society, necessary to this limited way of looking at life, as for instance many suburban communities besides our big cities today do. You have a very definite form of life, definite form of thinking, and you can stand life on this basis. But if somebody comes, you call him a prophet, and tries to disrupt this conformity, then he, of course, is stoned as all prophets were, because he takes away their fundamental safety belt.
Dr. Tillich, there's an area in which you have done a lot of thinking and writing, which I would like to get in a question or two about at this point. That is the area of art. I'd like to ask you first, what was the basis of your original interest in this field?
I can tell you this exactly. It was in the trenches of the First World War, where I saw all the ugliness of the world in every respect. Humanly, the disrupted nature, the disrupted human relations. And in this, and physical ugliness unspeakable. And in this ugliness, there came through the field bookstores for the soldiers, the magazines, and often very good magazines with very good pictures. And I cut them out immediately, and we all did this, and hang them up in our little huts in the war. And then I bought more books about it and gained more and more interest. And then I did, in the free times during the war, what I did at the university with philosophy. I studied it systematically, namely the history of art very exactly, and the different styles and all this. And then another thing happened. This was, I came back then from the war in 1918, and there was a friend of mine, a very excellent and brilliant art critic, who introduced me into modern artistic styles. It was mostly at that time German Expressionism and French painting since Cézanne. And I didn't understand it, and he showed it to me. And I remember this afternoon, which had importance for my whole life, in which I suddenly, like a lightning, realized what beauty of visual arts is and what beauty modern art can express. And ever since, I was like a converted, not religiously converted, but artistically converted follower of modern art.
Would you say that it is in such areas as this, in culture, in the arts, and perhaps in other phases of culture, that one can best begin his search for meaning, or perhaps, to use your phrase, ultimate concern? I'm really asking you a personal question here. In the search for meaning and for ultimate concern, what seems to you to be most important in your own experience?
No, this is a big question and needs a big answer. And you want me to make a little speech?
Yes.
No, all right, then I will try to do this. Now, the question of importance has, of course, a very biographical aspect, an autobiographical aspect. When I look back at my own life, then I would say that perhaps the church services given by my father in a very old 14th century Gothic church in eastern Germany, beautiful old church, and all what belonged to this church services impressed me so that I felt there is something which I much later, in theological terms, called with other people the holy. And this discovering of the sphere of the holy in the church services of my father was at the same time the basis for my decision to become a theologian. I don't doubt about this. This seems to be autobiographically very correct. There was an other element involved in it, the great dramatic vision which I found in the Christian drama, in the drama of creation, fall, incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection, and final judgment. Now, this whole is, of course, a whole of symbols, but these symbols had very early a tremendous power about my imagination. And I believe that out of the dramatic character of this story of the world in religious terms, my own type of dramatic thinking in philosophy came. My interest in philosophy of history, in the drawing the universe into human history. And now the next step was probably the discovery of philosophy. It was also an autobiographical event. I was in the house of one of the ministers, of whom my father was, as was called at that time, the superintendent, a kind of suffragette bishop, and there I discovered a not very big volume of history of philosophy. And I studied that thoroughly when I was still in school, and knew all the philosophers from the first to the last by heart and with their doctrines when I went to the university. And now I was at the university student both of theology and philosophy. And of course I had to find a way in which one can be both. And my whole theological work, which started very early in my own study years, the first traces of what I would think later are so early that I said today to my friends with whom I talk here that I didn't learn anything in my whole life, because in my earliest writings I find everything already present. Now, of course, it's only partly present and potentially present, but somehow it's present. And if you ask me now about the further things, then one cultural realm after the other came into my interest. Of course, politics, when I was pushed into the First World War as a chaplain and came back, and there was the German Revolution, which I enjoyed because I felt that the old system was ripe to go down. And there I developed what I have called, what we called at that time, religious socialism. Then came the discovery of Freud. We have talked together about it too, and my interest in philosophy and culture. Then came the interest in art, about which we just have talked. And then came, of course, with my children, the interest in the problems of education. And so the whole cultural realm was for me not a realm besides religion, but I saw always in all of them the problem of the ultimate meaning of life. And now something else connected with this. When you ask me what is the most important thing, then I would say neither of these cultural things is the most important thing, because they all are transitory. Every political creation comes and goes after a certain time. Every philosophical creation comes and goes. Every artistic creation comes and goes. Every poetic creation comes and goes. Therefore, what is absolutely important, unconditionally important, cannot be something which comes and goes, but which remains in all of them and through all of them. And now please don't believe that I answer the question what is most important with the word religion. I don't do this. Because I know religion as a function of man's spirit, religion as I like to call it, the self-transcending desire of man's spirit, is in itself something which comes and goes. So what is left if even religion is not that which is ultimately important? It is that which transcends all of them, which is beyond all of them, which is beyond religion as well as beyond culture. And that is the ultimate itself and its manifestation wherever it manifests itself. And of course, there are its manifestations in the realm of the religious life. We call them usually revelatory experiences, as the prophets had them. There is the ultimate, in the same way, in the philosophical life. Many philosophers took the ultimate equally seriously, as the theologians and as the religious people. It is in the artistic realm, and I know many artists who through their pictures want to communicate not only artistic symbols, but something ultimate. And so it's with all the other realms too. But it has always the character of in and through. Not religion, but something in and through religion. Not philosophy and the other cultural things, but in and through philosophy and the other cultural things. And this is what I call ultimate concern. Now this ultimate concern is the judging power for all the others. And it is the judging power because it has the character of eternity. And now if you ask me directly, what shall I take, what I take ultimately seriously, then I would say ultimately seriously I can take only the ultimate. And for the ultimate I also can say that which is without conditions, that which is infinite, that which is the eternal. So I can answer this question. Now if you ask me how came this really biographically to pass, then I could perhaps point to two moments. The one is the relation of being guilty, and the other is the relation of being finite. The relation of being guilty was experienced very strongly in early adolescence and childhood, and you can be guilty in an absolute sense only to that which is eternal. And the experience of being finite always occurred, especially in view of death. For instance, one night in the First World War, which I never can forget. But it appears again whenever death of others or the own death is near. And so I can perhaps conclude my answer to your question that there is only one thing which is ultimately seriously in life and death, and that is that which is eternal.
We have been visiting with Dr. Paul J. Tillich, distinguished philosopher and theologian, and member of the faculty, Harvard Divinity School, Harvard University, and his guests, Dr. Robert C. Johnson and Mr. Walter E. Wiest, both of the faculty of the Pittsburg Theological Seminary. This program was produced in the studios of station WQED in Pittsburgh.
And from the minds of those who enter in, this gift is given, and this, our heritage. This is National Educational Television.